After 2 weeks in the hospital from a heart attack, I returned home, but my daughter had changed the locks. "Go beg, you homeless bum, oh," she said, kicking me out onto the street. But a month later, she was standing at my door, begging me for money for food. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My phone sat silent on the bedside table, like a dead thing. 14 days in this cardiology ward, and the last text from Adeline was from March the 2nd. "Hope are feeling better, Dad." 3 words of effort, not even proper spelling. The family visiting hours had just ended. Down the hall, I could hear Mrs. Patterson laughing with her grandchildren, their small voices echoing off the sterile walls. Room 237 had flowers delivered twice this week. Even cranky Mr. Rodriguez in 241 had his son drive up from Indiana yesterday. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the empty notifications. My call log showed the same depressing pattern: outgoing calls to Adeline, all unanswered. The last time she'd picked up was 6 days ago, and that conversation lasted exactly 47 seconds. I knew because I'd checked afterward, like some pathetic stalker tracking my own daughter's attention span. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm beside me. 2 weeks ago, when the chest pain hit me like a sledgehammer to the ribs, I'd called 911 myself. Drove my own truck to the ER parking lot before collapsing in the waiting room. The whole time, thinking Adeline would rush over once the hospital called her. She came once, day 3, stayed 20 minutes, spent most of it on her phone, left saying she'd check in soon. Nurse Janet appeared in the doorway with a clipboard and that professional smile they taught in nursing school. "Mr. Harvey, I have your discharge papers ready. Your cardiologist cleared you this morning." Relief flooded through me. Home. My own bed, my own kitchen, maybe some decent food for the first time in 2 weeks. "When can I leave?" "Right now if you'd like, just need someone to drive you home for safety protocols." The assumption hung between us like smoke. Someone to drive me. Of course there would be someone. I reached for my phone, dialed Adeline's number. It rang 4 times, then her voice. "Hi, this is Addie. Leave a message." That cheerful fake tone she used for everyone except me. "Addie, it's Dad. They're releasing me from the hospital today. I need you to pick me up. Call me back." Janet was organizing my belongings in a plastic bag. Pajamas I'd bought in the hospital gift shop because I'd arrived in an ambulance. Reading glasses with a crack down the left lens. My wallet with exactly $120 cash D, what remained after insurance copays, and the ambulance bill. 30 minutes passed. No callback. I dialed again. Got voicemail again. My chest started tightening, but not from the heart condition. "Mr. Harvey, do you have anyone else who could drive you?" Janet's voice carried that careful neutrality healthcare workers use when families disappoint them. I thought about my neighbors. The Kowalskis were in Florida until May. Jim Chen worked late shifts. Everyone else on Maple Street was either too old to drive safely or barely knew me beyond polite waves. "I'll call a taxi." Janet nodded, but her expression said everything about what she thought of a 68-year-old heart patient going home alone. I fumbled with the rideshare app, my thick fingers clumsy on the small screen. The estimated wait time was 12 minutes. Those 12 minutes stretched like hours. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, plastic bag clutched in my lap, watching other patients wheel past my door with family members fussing around them. Each laugh from the hallway felt like a small knife twist. For 35 years, I'd covered every rent payment when Adeline couldn't find work, every grocery bill when her unemployment ran out, every car repair when she somehow always picked the worst possible vehicles. I'd transferred the house deed to her name after my wife died, wanting to protect her future. The taxi app chimed. "Your driver Mike is here." I stood carefully, testing my balance. 2 weeks of lying around had weakened my legs more than I'd expected. The plastic bag rustled as I gathered my few possessions, and I realized this was everything I owned that mattered enough to bring to the hospital. Janet walked me to the elevator, chatting about follow-up appointments and medication schedules, but I barely heard her. My mind kept circling back to that voicemail, to the silence, to the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted while I was fighting to keep my heart beating. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, pressing the lobby button with a trembling finger. As we descended, I tried calling Adeline one more time. "Hi, this is Addie. Leave a message." I didn't. The taxi was a worn Crown Victoria that smelled like coffee and air freshener, fighting a losing battle against cigarette smoke. Mike, the driver, was maybe 50, with graying temples and calloused hands that suggested he knew real work. "Where to?" he asked as I settled into the back seat, still catching my breath from the short walk. "Oak Park, Maple Street." I gave him the address I'd lived at for 23 years, the house where I'd raised Adeline after her mother died, where every room held memories of better times. Mike pulled into evening traffic, and Chicago spread out beyond the windshield like a familiar blanket. The hospital district gave way to residential neighborhoods, streetlights flickering on in the gathering dusk. Rush hour meant this drive would take 45 minutes instead of the usual 25. "Hospital stay?" Mike glanced at me in the rearview mirror. 2 weeks. Heart gave out on me. "Damn, family didn't visit much?" The question hit harder than he'd intended. "My daughter's busy with her own life." Mike nodded like he understood, but his eyes in the mirror held sympathy I didn't want to see. We passed Lincoln Park, where I'd taught Adeline to ride a bike when she was 7. She'd crashed into Mrs. Patterson's rose bushes, and I'd spent an hour picking thorns out of her palms while she cried. Back then, I was her hero. Dad could fix anything: scraped knees, broken toys, mean kids at school. When her mother got sick, I'd been the one to explain cancer in words a 13-year-old could understand. When her mother died, I'd held Adeline while she sobbed, promising I'd never leave her alone. The irony tasted bitter in my mouth. Traffic crawled past Wicker Park. I counted the money in my wallet again. 6 20s. Medical bills had demolished my savings faster than a wrecking ball through drywall. The house was paid off. I'd made sure of that before transferring the deed. Smart planning, I'd thought. Give Adeline security. "Kids these days," Mike said, merging onto the Kennedy Expressway. "Always got their faces in phones, never time for family." "She's 35, I said quietly. Mike's eyebrows rose in the mirror. He didn't say anything after that. I remembered the day I'd signed those deed transfer papers. Adeline had been unemployed for 8 months then, living off my construction pension while claiming to find herself. The lawyer had warned me about giving away my primary asset, but I'd waved off his concerns. She was my daughter, my only family. The taxi exited onto Harlem Avenue, familiar territory now. We passed the diner where I used to take Adeline for pancakes every Saturday morning until she turned 16 and decided spending time with her father wasn't cool anymore. The hardware store where I'd bought supplies for countless home projects, always with Adeline tagging along, asking questions about every tool. When had she stopped asking questions? When had conversations become one-sided phone calls where I talked about my day while she grunted responses between whatever show she was watching? "Almost there," Mike announced, turning onto residential streets lined with modest 2-story homes. My chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't my heart condition. Something felt wrong. Not just Adeline's absence from the hospital, but something deeper. A nagging sensation that had been growing during the taxi ride, like walking into a room and sensing someone had been through your belongings. "That's it," I said as we approached my house. The blue one with the white porch. Mike pulled into the driveway behind a car I didn't recognize. A newer Honda with Illinois plates. Probably belonged to a neighbor's kid. The front windows glowed with warm light, and I could see movement inside, shadows crossing back and forth. At least someone was home. I paid Mike, including a $5 tip I couldn't afford, but gave anyway because he'd been kind during the drive. He waited while I gathered my plastic bag, and I appreciated that small courtesy more than he'd ever know. "Take care of yourself," he called through the passenger window. The taxi pulled away, leaving me standing in my own driveway like a stranger, holding everything I owned in a hospital bag. The March evening air carried the promise of spring, but I shivered anyway, eager to get inside to warmth and familiarity. I walked up the 3 steps to my front porch, key ring already in my hand. My fingers found the house key automatically, muscle memory from 23 years of coming home. The porch light cast everything in yellow warmth, and I could smell Mrs. Chen's dinner cooking next door, something with garlic and ginger that made my stomach growl. The key slid toward the lock, but stopped. Wrong angle. I adjusted, tried again. Nothing. The key wouldn't even enter the cylinder. I pulled it out, examined it under the porch light. Same brass key I'd used thousands of times, worn smooth where my thumb gripped it. But when I looked at the lock itself, my breath caught. New brass hardware. Shiny recent installation. The old bronze deadbolt with its familiar scratches was gone. What the hell is wrong with this lock? I tried my backup key, then the old spare from my wallet. None of them fit. My hands started shaking D, whether from exhaustion, confusion, or something deeper, I couldn't tell. The hospital stay had left me weaker than I'd admitted, and standing on the porch holding my pathetic belongings made everything worse. Through the front window, I glimpsed unfamiliar shapes in my living room. A large flat-screen TV where my old console television used to sit. Different furniture arrangement. Were those new curtains? My legs felt unsteady. This was my house. My name was still on the deed, even if I'd transferred ownership to protect Adeline. I had rights here. I had a life here. The sound of footsteps approached from inside, floorboards creaking in a pattern I knew better than my own heartbeat. Someone was walking down the hallway toward the front door, taking their time. I pressed the doorbell, hating myself for needing to ring it at my own home. The chime echoed inside, followed by silence. Then more footsteps, slower now, deliberate. "Who is it?" Adeline's voice, but different somehow. Colder, more distant than the phone conversations. "Addie, it's me, Dad." "Open up!" A pause that lasted too long. I could hear her breathing on the other side of the door, could sense her considering something I didn't understand. The porch light cast my shadow against the white door, and I realized I looked like a beggar standing there with my hospital bag. Locks turned to multiple locks, more than I remembered installing. The door opened slowly, revealing Adeline's face in the gap between door and frame. She looked good, better than I'd expected. Her hair was styled, makeup carefully applied. She wore clothes I didn't recognize, expensive-looking clothes. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of someone else in the living room, a man's figure moving in the shadows. Adeline stared at me for several seconds, her expression unreadable in the porch light. Adeline stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, blocking the entrance like a security guard. Her makeup was perfect, her clothes expensive. Dyes, a silk blouse I'd never seen before, designer jeans that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She looked prosperous, healthy, completely unburdened by concern for her father, who just spent 2 weeks fighting for his life. "Addie, I couldn't get my key to work. Something's wrong with the lock." Her laugh was sharp, cutting. "Nothing's wrong with it. It works fine for people who live here." The words hit me like a physical blow. I shifted my weight, the plastic hospital bag crinkling in my grip. "What are you talking about? I live here. This is my house." "No." Her voice turned ice cold. "This is my house, and Judson lives here now." Behind her, I caught sight of men's boots by the door, expensive leather, size 12, nothing I owned. The scent of cologne drifted out, something musky and heavy that made my stomach turn. A leather jacket hung on the coat hook, where my work jacket used to be. "Who's Judson?" "My boyfriend, and he's been taking care of me while you were lying around feeling sorry for yourself." The cruelty in her voice was something new, something I'd never heard before. This wasn't the daughter who used to crawl into my lap when she had nightmares, who'd cried in my arms when her mother died. "Addie, you can't do this to me. I just got out of the hospital. I have nowhere to go." She stepped further into the doorway, making sure I couldn't see past her into my own living room. "Go beg, homeless man. You don't live here anymore." The words were like a slap across the face. Homeless man. From my own daughter. "This is impossible. I built this house. I've been paying for it for 30 years. And 5 years ago, you signed it over to me, remember? For my security, you said. Well, now I'm secure." Memory crashed over me like cold water. The lawyer's office, papers spread across the mahogany desk. I'd wanted to protect her, make sure she'd always have a roof over her head. The deed transfer had seemed like good planning then. "But I'm your father." Fathers don't abandon their daughters for weeks without calling. "I was in the hospital. I nearly died." She shrugged, the gesture casual and devastating. "I had my own problems to deal with." From somewhere inside the house, a man's voice called out, "Everything okay, babe?" "Just some old guy looking for handouts," she called back, her eyes never leaving mine. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd experienced, worse than the heart attack, worse than watching my wife fade away from cancer. This was my child, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, treating me like garbage on the doorstep. "You can't do this to me," I whispered. "I can. and I am. Goodbye." She stepped back and closed the door. The new deadbolt turned with a solid click, followed by the chain lock sliding into place. I stood there staring at the white paint, my reflection ghost-like in the door's small window. Behind the closed door, I heard her voice again, lighter now, talking to this Judson person. Their conversation was muffled, but I caught fragments. "Took care of it. Won't be a problem anymore." My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the porch railing for support, the plastic bag slipping from my other hand and hitting the concrete with a pathetic rustle. 5 minutes passed before I could move, maybe 10. The streetlights had grown brighter while I stood there, and the Kowalski's automatic porch light clicked on across the street. Inside my former home, I could hear the television volume increase, normal evening sounds of people settling in for the night, people who belonged somewhere. I sank down onto the front steps, my body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been building since the hospital discharge. The concrete was cold through my thin hospital pants, but the physical discomfort seemed trivial compared to the hollow ache spreading through my chest. 30 years I'd paid the mortgage on this house, started when Adeline was 5 years old, worked double shifts in construction to cover payments and childcare after my wife got sick. Even after the transfer, I'd kept paying the utilities, property taxes, maintenance costs. My daughter had never held a job longer than 6 months, never contributed a penny toward household expenses. I pulled out my wallet and counted the bills again under the porch light. 620s. Not enough for a hotel room for more than a few nights, certainly not enough to start over at 68 years old with a damaged heart. The medical bills had wiped out 40 years of savings. Insurance covered the surgery, but not the rehabilitation, not the medications, not the ambulance ride that had cost $800 for a 12-minute trip. My checking account showed the devastating reality when I'd checked it yesterday, barely enough for basic survival. But as I scrolled through my banking app, something caught my attention. The savings account I rarely used, opened years ago for emergency funds. Balance, $3,247.43. Money I'd forgotten about. Automatic transfers that had continued even while the medical expenses mounted. Not enough to buy another house, but enough to survive while I figured out what came next. A car pulled into the Chen's driveway next door. Jim stepped out, carrying his lunch cooler and work boots, probably finishing another 12-hour shift at the plant. He waved when he saw me, started to walk over, then stopped when he noticed my hospital bag and confused expression. "Everything all right, Leland?" I couldn't explain it, not yet. "Just getting some air." He nodded, unconvinced, but respected my privacy enough not to push. After he disappeared inside, I realized how alone I truly was in this neighborhood, where I'd lived for over 2 decades. My phone felt heavy in my hands as I scrolled through the contacts. Family friends had drifted away over the years. Work colleagues from the construction business were mostly retired or dead. The few remaining names were people I hadn't spoken to in months, some in years. But there was one possibility. Tommy Rodriguez had run a successful renovation company until his son took over the business. We'd worked together on 3 major projects before I retired, and he'd always said I had a good eye for structural problems. Last I heard, his company was expanding into consulting work for older buildings around Chicago. The decision crystallized like morning frost on a windshield. I wouldn't beg Adeline for mercy. I wouldn't grovel or plead or remind her of everything I'd sacrificed. If she wanted to throw away 35 years of love and support for some boyfriend who probably saw her as an easy mark, that was her choice. I stood up, testing my balance. The dizziness had passed, replaced by something harder and more focused. I opened the taxi app again and requested a ride to the Lincoln Motel on I-90D, the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask questions. While I waited, I took one last look at the house I'd built with my own hands. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding my life. The alarm clock in the Lincoln Motel room buzzed at 6:30 a.m., though I'd been awake since 4 listening to truck traffic rumble past on I-90. The mattress sagged in the middle, and the heating unit rattled like an angry cat. But I'd slept better than expected. Maybe exhaustion, maybe relief at having made a decision instead of wallowing in self-pity. I sat up carefully, testing my heart rate. Steady, strong. The cardiologist had been right about the recovery timeline. Physical healing was progressing well. It was the emotional wounds that would take longer to close. The motel room was exactly what $60 a night bought. Worn brown carpet, water stains on the ceiling, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. But the coffee maker worked, and the shower had hot water, basic shelter while I sorted out my next moves. I checked my bank balance again on my phone. The $3,200 in savings account looked different now. D, not like poverty, but like opportunity. Enough to survive for several months if I was careful. Longer if I found work. Tommy Rodriguez's business card was buried in my wallet behind old insurance papers and receipts. I'd kept it for 3 years without knowing why. Now I knew. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. Rodriguez Construction and Consulting. Tommy, this is Leland Harvey. You remember me from the Wicker Park renovation? Leland, man, how are you? I heard through the grapevine you were in the hospital, heart trouble. 2 weeks in cardiology, but I'm back on my feet. Listen, I need some work. Consulting stuff, nothing too physical. You still doing structural assessments on those old Chicago buildings? A pause while he considered. Sure we are. Matter of fact, I got a job starting Monday D old warehouse conversion in Logan Square. Owner wants someone with experience looking at the load-bearing walls before they start gutting the place. I can handle that. Pays $200 a day, cash if you prefer. $200. Not enough to rebuild my life overnight, but enough to maintain dignity while planning something bigger. I'll take it. Good. Meet me Monday morning at 1247 North Milwaukee Avenue, 8 a.m. sharp. After hanging up, I made a mental inventory of my resources. Knowledge gained from 40 years in construction was still valuable. Contractors my age understood building codes and structural integrity in ways that younger workers, focused on speed and profit, sometimes missed. Insurance companies trusted experienced eyes to spot problems that could cost them millions in claims. The motel room suddenly felt less like a prison and more like temporary quarters. I'd lived in worse places during my early career, sleeping in construction trailers and rented rooms while building my reputation. This was just another rebuilding phase. I showered and dressed in the cleanest clothes from my hospital bag, then walked to the motel office. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, barely looked up when I paid for another 3 nights. Staying in town long? She asked while processing my cash, getting back on my feet. She nodded like she'd heard that story before, but wished me luck anyway. Outside, the March morning carried the promise of spring. Snow had melted from the parking lot, leaving only dirty ice in the shadowed corners. Traffic moved steadily on the interstate, people heading to jobs and purposes and places where they belonged. I bought coffee and a newspaper from the lobby vending machines, then sat in the motel parking lot reading help-wanted ads. Construction consulting, building inspection, project management, dozens of opportunities for someone with my experience. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking Adeline had reconsidered, but it was from Tommy. Looking forward to Monday. Bring your measuring tape. I smiled for the first time since leaving the hospital. I pulled out a small notebook from my wallet and started making lists. Contacts to call, skills to market, steps toward independence. The Lincoln Motel might not be home, but it was a base of operations. By noon, I'd made 4 more calls to former colleagues and scheduled 2 additional consulting meetings for the week. Word traveled fast in the construction industry. Leland Harvey was available again, and his expertise was still in demand. Monday morning arrived with purpose for the first time in weeks. I'd spent the weekend after my job arrangement buying proper work clothes at a discount store, steel-toed boots, canvas pants, flannel shirt that reminded me of better days when I'd built things instead of just surviving. The construction site on North Milwaukee Avenue buzzed with familiar energy. Concrete trucks rumbled in the street. Workers shouted instructions over machinery noise, and the smell of fresh lumber mixed with diesel exhaust created an atmosphere I'd missed more than I realized. Tommy Rodriguez met me at the temporary office trailer, looking exactly the same as 3 years ago. Stocky build, graying mustache, hard hat permanently creased from decades of use. Leland, you look good for a guy who nearly died. Takes more than a bad ticker to keep me down. He handed me blueprints for the warehouse conversion project. Foundation concerns on the east wall. Owner wants to know if it'll hold 3 stories instead of 2. I spread the plans across a plywood table, muscle memory taking over as I studied load calculations and support beam specifications. Within 20 minutes, I'd identified 2 potential problems the architect had missed. D places where additional steel reinforcement would prevent catastrophic failure down the line. Still got the eye, Tommy said, reviewing my notes. The work felt natural, necessary. For 2 weeks I'd been a patient, a victim, a man without purpose. Now I was a professional again, someone whose opinion carried weight and whose knowledge prevented disasters. During lunch break, sitting with the crew on stacked lumber, conversations naturally drifted to neighborhood gossip. Frank Miller, a carpenter who'd lived in Oak Park for 20 years, mentioned troubles brewing on the residential side. That little guy who moved on to Maple Street, Frank said around a bite of sandwich. Neighbors say he's bad news. My blood chilled, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of trouble? Third woman in 2 years, another worker chimed in. Same pattern every time D moves in fast, takes over their house, then disappears with whatever's valuable. Tommy frowned. Police ever get involved? Hard to prove when the women let him move in willingly, Frank explained. By the time they realize what happened, he's gone with their jewelry, electronics, anything he can sell quick. I forced myself to eat another bite, though food turned to sawdust in my mouth. Recent activity? Yeah, actually. Word is he's working on Harvey's daughter over on Maple Street. Poor girl's been unemployed for years. Easy target. The irony would have been funny if it weren't devastating. They were talking about my own family situation without knowing it, discussing my daughter's vulnerability like a weather report. Harvey family, you know them? I asked carefully. Frank shook his head. Old man Leland built half the houses in that neighborhood back in the day. Haven't seen him around lately, though. Heard he had health problems. Shame when family troubles hit, Tommy added, not knowing he was talking to the family in question. I spent the rest of the week listening. Construction workers knew everything that happened in their neighborhood's D, who was getting divorced, who lost jobs, who had money troubles. Information flowed as naturally as coffee from thermoses. By Friday, I'd learned that Judson Little was his real name, that he'd skipped town from 3 previous relationships under suspicious circumstances, and that 2 women had filed police reports that went nowhere due to lack of evidence. My daughter had invited a professional con artist into the house I'd given her. The knowledge sat in my stomach like a stone, but alongside the anger came something else. Clarity. For the first time since the hospital, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just family betrayal. This was a criminal targeting my child, using her against me. Saturday evening, I sat in the motel room counting my earnings from the week. $1,400 cash with another week of work already scheduled. Financial independence was returning faster than I dared hope. I opened my notebook and began writing down everything I'd learned about Judson Little, creating a profile like the police reports he'd apparently avoided. Patterns, methods, vulnerable targets. Information was power, and power was what I'd need for what came next. April 10th dawned clear and cold, the kind of spring morning that promised winter was finally losing its grip on Chicago. I'd settled into a routine at the Lincoln Motel, D-coffee at 6 buying, news on my phone, planning the day's work schedule. The room felt less temporary now, more like a tactical base. My phone screen showed 15 missed calls from Adeline, all from yesterday afternoon and evening. The notification badges made red dots across the display like warning signals. 3 voicemails, 8 text messages, and 2 missed video calls. I didn't listen to any of them. The text messages told their own story as I scrolled through the timestamps. Dad, please call me at 3:17 p.m. Something happened at 4:23 p.m. I really need to talk to you at 6:45 p.m. Dad, please at 9:12 p.m. Desperation had a digital signature, and my daughter was broadcasting it loud and clear. Instead of responding, I dressed and drove to the grocery store where I'd shopped for 20 years, back when I had a home and a normal life. The familiar aisles felt strange now, like visiting a museum of my former existence. I was examining apples in the produce section when Mrs. Peterson appeared beside me, her silver hair perfectly styled despite being 7:30 in the morning. Leland Harvey, where on earth have you been hiding? Around town, staying busy. Her eyes narrowed with the intensity of someone who'd spent 75 years perfecting the art of neighborhood intelligence gathering. Your daughter has been looking everywhere for you. She came to my house yesterday crying. I selected 3 apples and placed them in my basket. What's wrong with Adeline? That boyfriend disappeared, vanished Tuesday night with half her belongings, from what I hear. She's been calling every number in your old address book, trying to find you. The apple in my hand felt suddenly heavy. Tuesday night was April 8th, exactly when Frank Miller had predicted Judson would make his move. The construction crew gossip network had been more accurate than any weather forecast. What kind of belongings? Mrs. Peterson glanced around the produce section, then leaned closer. Television, computer, anything electronic. They say he even took her mother's jewelry. Those pieces you saved for her after Margaret passed. Margaret's ring collection, the pearl necklace from our 20th anniversary, the antique brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. I'd kept everything safe for Adeline, stored in the bedroom bureau for when she was ready to treasure them properly. Also heard he cleared out some kind of cash box she kept hidden, Mrs. Peterson continued. Emergency money her father always told her to maintain. My emergency money. Funds I'd insisted she keep available for situations exactly like this, back when I'd thought emergency meant car repairs or medical bills, not abandonment by a criminal boyfriend. She's desperate to reach you, Leland. Whatever happened between you two, maybe it's time to talk. I thanked Mrs. Peterson and finished my shopping, but my mind was calculating. Judson had struck exactly as predicted, taking everything portable and valuable, then disappearing before Adeline could react. The pattern Frank had described was playing out in my own family like a scripted performance. My phone buzzed with another text as I loaded groceries into my truck. Dad, I know I hurt you. Please come home. Home. She still thought of it as my home when she needed something. I drove back to the motel without responding, but for the first time since the hospital, I was smiling. The knocking started at 8:17 p.m., frantic and urgent. I'd been expecting it for days, ever since Mrs. Peterson's grocery store revelation. Adeline had finally tracked me down, probably through the same neighborhood network that had informed me about Judson's crimes. Dad, I know you're in there. Please open the door. Her voice carried through the thin motel wall like desperation given sound. I sat calmly on the edge of the bed, letting her knock and plead while I finished reading the evening news on my phone. Market reports, construction industry updates, anything except the emergency unfolding outside my door. Dad, please, I need to talk to you. After 5 more minutes, I stood and approached the door, but didn't unlock it. What do you want? I want to apologize. Can I come in? No, say whatever you need to say from where you are. Through the door's peephole, I could see her leaning against the frame, looking smaller than I remembered. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, her hair unwashed. The makeup that had been perfect during our last confrontation was smeared around her eyes. I made a terrible mistake, she said, voice cracking. About everything. About us. Which mistake specifically? A long pause. Judson, he's gone. He took things and left. What kind of things? Everything valuable. The TV, my computer, Mom's jewelry box. Her voice broke completely. Even the emergency cash you taught me to keep hidden. I remained silent, letting the confession build momentum. He waited until I went grocery shopping Tuesday evening. When I came back, half the house was empty. He'd packed a U-Haul truck and disappeared. Where did he go? I don't know. Maybe California, maybe Mexico. His phone's disconnected, social media accounts deleted, like he never existed. Through the peephole, I watched her slide down the doorframe until she was sitting on the concrete outside my room. Her shoulders shook with sobs that sounded genuine for the first time in years. Dad, I was wrong about everything. I was stupid and selfish, and I treated you horribly when you needed me most. Yes, you did. My calm agreement seemed to shock her more than anger would have. She looked up toward the door, tears streaming down her face. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you terribly. But you're the only family I have left, and I don't know what to do. You told me to go beg, remember? You called me a homeless man. I was angry and scared and... She stopped, probably realizing excuses wouldn't work anymore. I was wrong. I was completely, totally wrong. A truck thundered past on I-90, drowning out whatever she said next. When the noise faded, she was talking about the house. Can't afford the utilities anymore. Property taxes are due next month, and I don't have any income. Without you covering expenses, I can't maintain the house. Interesting. The legal ownership she'd been so proud of came with financial responsibilities she'd never considered. Reality was teaching her lessons I'd failed to impart over 35 years. What exactly are you asking me for? Come home, please. I need help, and you need a place to live. We can figure this out together. I unlocked the door, but didn't open it, letting the deadbolt click echo in the night air. When I pulled it open, she was still sitting on the concrete, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes and desperate hope. "Stand up," I said quietly. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with her sleeve like a child. "Does this mean you'll come back?" I studied her face in the motel's harsh fluorescent lighting, seeing both the little girl who used to trust me completely and the woman who'd thrown me away without a second thought. "That depends," I said finally, "on whether you're ready to hear my conditions." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Adeline stood in the motel doorway, tears still fresh on her cheeks, waiting for me to respond to her confession about Judson's theft. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, letting the moment expand until her breathing became audible. "Your mother's jewelry," I said finally. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. The pearl necklace, the anniversary ring, everything from the bureau drawer. "How much cash?" $1,200 from the lockbox behind the bathroom mirror, I calculated quickly. Electronics, jewelry, emergency funds. Dee Judson had probably cleared $15,000 worth of assets in a single afternoon. Professional efficiency. "You trusted a stranger with access to everything I'd saved for you. I thought I loved him." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Love doesn't require changing locks against your own father." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I know. I was wrong about everything." I stood up slowly, my heart rate steady despite the confrontation. 2 weeks of construction work had restored my physical confidence, and having leverage restored something deeper. The authority I'd spent decades building and lost in a hospital bed. "I'll come back under only one condition." Hope flickered across her face. "Anything, whatever it takes. You'll transfer the house back to me." The hope died instantly. "But Dad, that's my house. You gave it to me." "I did, and you used legal ownership to lock me out while I was recovering from a heart attack. Now you want my help. That's the condition." She started pacing in the narrow space between the bed and the wall, hands gesturing frantically. "There has to be another way. I could get a job, pay rent to live there. 35 years old and never held a job longer than 6 months. What employer would trust you now?" The brutal honesty stopped her pacing. "I could learn, change, be better." "You had your chance to be better. You chose Judson instead." "Can't we share ownership? Split the house legally?" I shook my head. "All or nothing. I won't risk being locked out of my own home again." Her composure cracked completely. She sat heavily on the room's single chair, face in her hands. "Without the house, I have nothing. No job, no savings, no family, except you. Should have thought of that before calling me a homeless beggar." The words hit their mark. She looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I can't survive on my own. Neither could I when you threw me out. But I figured it out." Several minutes passed while she processed the reality of her situation. Outside, trucks continued their endless parade on I-90, carrying goods and people toward destinations that mattered. Inside this cramped room, my daughter was learning what consequences felt like. "If I transfer the house back," she said slowly, "will you let me live there? We'll discuss living arrangements after the legal transfer is complete." Her eyes widened as the implication sank in. No guarantees, no promises beyond the basic transaction. She was negotiating from complete weakness, exactly where I'd been a month ago. "When would we do this?" "Tomorrow." "I know a lawyer." "How much will it cost?" "I'll handle the fees." She realized I had money now, resources she hadn't considered. The construction consulting had given me more than income. Dee had restored my confidence in my own value. "Dad, I don't have anywhere else to go." "You should have considered that before." Another long silence. Finally, she straightened her shoulders with something approaching dignity. "If that's what it takes to make things right between us, I'll do it." 10 a.m. tomorrow, Patterson's law office on Lake Street. I handed her a business card from my wallet, one I'd kept from the house deed transfer 5 years earlier, full circle. "Should I meet you there?" she asked. "We'll arrive separately. This is business now, not family." She stood to leave, then turned back. "After tomorrow, after the transfer, will you forgive me?" I met her eyes for the first time since opening the door. "We'll see." I arrived at Patterson's law office 15 minutes early, wearing the navy blazer I'd bought specifically for this appointment. Professional appearance mattered when reclaiming your life, and I wanted every detail perfect. The morning had started with careful preparation, shower, shave, organized paperwork, and the satisfaction of a man executing a well-planned strategy. Adeline appeared at exactly 10 a.m., clutching a folder of documents and looking like she hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she signed in with the receptionist. We didn't speak while waiting, sitting in leather chairs positioned across from each other like opposing lawyers. Mr. Patterson emerged from his office at 10:05, the same elderly attorney who'd handled the original house transfer. His gray suit and methodical manner had aged well, and he remembered our previous business with professional courtesy. "Mr. Harvey, Miss Harvey, let's review what we're doing today." His office overlooked downtown Oak Park through tall windows that framed spring trees beginning to show green. Law books lined mahogany shelves, and his desk displayed 40 years' worth of property law expertise. This was where serious business happened. "Property retransfer from daughter to father," Patterson said, reading from his notes. "Voluntary transaction, no coercion alleged by either party." He looked directly at Adeline. "Miss Harvey, are you certain about this decision? Once we complete this transfer, you'll have no legal claim to the property." "Yes?" Her voice barely carried across the desk. "I'm sure. Any outstanding mortgages or liens against the property?" "None," I answered. "House was paid off before the original transfer." Patterson nodded and produced a stack of documents. Transfer deed, tax implications, paperwork, ownership certification forms. Each page required Adeline's signature, and I watched her hand shake with every pen stroke. "Current property value is assessed at $340,000, Patterson continued. "Are we including any monetary consideration for this transfer?" Adeline glanced at me hopefully, probably thinking about getting cash from the deal. "No monetary exchange," I said firmly. "Gift transfer, same as the original." Her face fell, but she continued signing where Patterson indicated. "Registration will be complete by tomorrow afternoon," the lawyer explained. "Until then, Miss Harvey retains technical ownership, but Mr. Harvey will have documentation proving the pending transfer." "When will the documents be registered?" I asked. "Tomorrow by 3 p.m. Everything will be official then." I paid the $600 fee in cash, watching Adeline's eyes widen when I pulled $700 bills from my wallet. She was realizing her father had more resources than she'd calculated. "Dad," she said, as we gathered our copies of the paperwork, "now you'll come back home?" I looked at her across Patterson's polished desk. This woman who'd thrown me away like garbage and now expected immediate reconciliation because she'd signed papers under duress. "Tomorrow I'll return," I said, "after the registration is complete." "But tonight?" "Tonight you'll pack your belongings. I'll be there tomorrow evening." Her mouth opened to protest, then closed when she saw my expression. She was learning that legal ownership wasn't the same as unconditional forgiveness. We left the office separately. She walked toward the bus stop, shoulders slumped with defeat. I drove back to the motel with documents that would restore everything I'd lost. Tomorrow would complete 30 days of the hardest education my daughter had ever received. Morning light streamed through my former bedroom windows as I stood in the house that was legally mine again as of 3 p.m. yesterday. Adeline had left her key on the kitchen counter the night before, along with a note. "I'm staying at Jenny's apartment. See you when you're ready to talk." Jenny Morrison, her friend from high school. Another unemployed woman living off family support. Perfect choice for temporary refuge. I'd spent the previous evening changing every lock in the house, front door, back door, garage entrance, even the basement access. 40 years in construction had taught me the value of good security, and the irony of using those skills to lock out my own daughter felt like perfect symmetry. Her belongings sat in neat boxes by the front door. I'd packed everything carefully: clothes, books, personal items, even the cheap jewelry Judson had deemed worthless enough to leave behind. Respect for her possessions, if not for her choices. The house felt different without strangers' cologne contaminating the air. I'd opened every window despite the April chill, letting fresh wind carry away the last traces of Judson Little's occupation. My wife's photographs were back in their proper places. My reading chair faced the television again. By 2 p.m., I was waiting. Adeline appeared at exactly 2:47 p.m., grocery bags in both hands, walking up the driveway like she still lived here. The same confident stride she'd used when locking me out, before Judson taught her about vulnerability. I watched through the window as she approached the front door, shifted the grocery bags to one hand, and reached for her key. The key that would no longer work because the lock was new, because the house was mine again, because I'd learned her methods and improved upon them. She tried the key twice, jiggling it like I had that night weeks ago. Confusion crossed her face as she examined the lock mechanism, noting the new brass finish where old bronze used to be. Then she knocked. "Dad, why isn't the lock working?" I opened the door slowly, letting her see me standing in the frame of my own house, on my own property, in complete control of the situation. Her grocery bag slipped from her hands, apples and oranges rolling across the porch. "Go beg, homeless woman. You don't live here anymore." The words hit her exactly as they had hit me. She stepped backward, almost tripping over the scattered fruit, her mouth opening in shock. "What? Dad, we had an agreement." "Yes, we did. The house is mine now, and you don't live here anymore." "You can't do this? I'm your daughter. You were my daughter, until you called me a homeless beggar and slammed this door in my face." I held up the new keys, letting brass catch the afternoon sunlight. "These locks work fine for people who live here. But where will I go? I don't have anywhere. You should have thought of that before trusting a criminal with access to everything I'd given you." Her legs seemed to give out. She sank onto the porch steps, staring up at me with the same desperate expression I'd worn outside this same door 4 weeks ago. The reversal was so complete, it felt like watching a play where actors had switched roles. "I learned my lesson," she whispered. "I know I was wrong." "Good. Now you can learn what it feels like to start over with nothing." I stepped back into my house, my sanctuary, my home that smelled like coffee and wood polish instead of stranger's cologne. Through the window, I watched her gather scattered groceries with shaking hands. "Dad, please." I closed the door. The new deadbolt turned with a solid, satisfying click, followed by the chain lock sliding into place. Outside, I could hear her crying, but the sound was muffled by walls that were mine again, in a house where I belonged. Justice had a specific sound, the sound of locks that kept out people who'd forgotten how to deserve trust. For the first time in a month, I was home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.